Today we're diving into the world of super fakes, which is really not a brand new concept. It's been a topic of conversation for a few years now, but in the past couple of months, it has really shaken up the world of luxury, mainly because of these allegations that came out from China, where Chinese manufacturers claimed to be responsible for the production of highly exclusive luxury bags like the Hermes Birkin and the Chanel Classic Flap. And some of these super fakes are getting so convincing that some people actually believe these allegations, when in reality, they of course could not be further from the truth. So it's more important than ever before to be informed on this topic, because indeed super fakes are only getting more accurate, more convincing, and sadly more accessible. And you might be sitting at home thinking, this really doesn't concern me. I'll never buy a piece of luxury outside of the brand's own boutique or a department store like Harrods. Well, you might still want to watch this, because some of these super fakes are so convincing that in the recent past they have fallen through the cracks and they could have ended up in your very own collection. So if you'd like to find out why super fakes are on the rise, how they are a threat to all of us luxury enthusiasts, and most importantly, how to spot one, then make sure to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe down below if you haven't done so yet, and keep on watching. I have no doubt you're going to be familiar with the idea of traditional counterfeit handbags, which are low quality, cheaply made, and quite frankly, cheap looking replicas of designer pieces that you could buy from sketchy street vendors on streets like Canal Street. And if you have any experience with luxury pieces, especially if it's something that you have been familiarizing yourself with and you've been aspiring to own, you could never mistake a cheap counterfeit for the real thing, because the difference is so incredibly obvious. But what we're talking about here, super fakes, they go way beyond that. Super fakes are ultra advanced, near perfect copies of designer bags, jewelry, accessories, and even ready-to-wear that look, feel, and even smell like the real deal. So super fakes are not your typical knockoffs. These are crafted in some cases using the exact same materials, sourced from the same factories as their original counterparts. They are made by craftspeople or people who have the capacity to invest time and effort into the creation of these things, and they're not nearly as inexpensive as a traditional counterfeit would be. So I'm not really familiar with the current street value of a cheap knockoff, but let's say a Birkin that you could find on Canal Street would cost you $100, whereas a Birkin that you would buy from one of these super fake manufacturers would set you back a couple $1,000. So the quality is also reflected in the price. Of course, you would not expect the same quality for $100 that you would expect for $1,000 or $2,000. And for this increased price, you're also getting an enhanced experience. You're getting a creation that is made using similar materials, if not completely identical materials. The details, the different features might be sourced from the very same factories. They are assembled by skilled workers who put real effort into these pieces, and they might actually come wrapped in the exact same packaging as the original item that you would buy directly from the store. In fact, some of them even come accompanied with a receipt. I mean, if they can replicate an entire bag, why could they not replicate just a piece of paper? And I have heard that some of these manufacturers even operate fake stores. So if you want to unbox an Hermes Birkin, a super fake Hermes Birkin, you can do that in a storefront that is perfectly designed to resemble the original boutique, and you can even post it on your social media. I mean, if you're unboxing an Hermes Birkin in a store that looks like an Hermes store, who wouldn't believe that you're buying the real deal? So they really go the next level when it comes to replicating not only the bags but also the overall experience. But as we discussed earlier, it is something that's going to cost you. So these pieces can really not be compared to traditional counterfeits, not only because of the amount of effort that goes into the creation of these pieces, but also because of their pricing. Some of these super fakes will set you back thousands of dollars. In fact, I've even heard of super fakes that will set you back close to $10,000 because they are made of authentic exotic leathers. So you can buy a Himalaya Birkin or a Birkin that's crafted from extremely high quality leather. And you might be sitting at home thinking, well, how is this possible? How can an Hermes bag be replicated when it's meant to be the epitome of quality? Well, these pieces are made by humans using manual labor. So if one human can do it, why couldn't another two? There is a big difference, which we'll discuss later on in this video, but I want to bust the biggest myth. Just because something doesn't come from France and an original Hermes factory doesn't mean that it cannot be the exact same quality. Now, I'm not saying that it is and you're getting the real deal, because there is a key difference, but it can be comparable and it's not something that should be looked down upon. But what is that key difference? Well, the difference is the amount of time that an Hermes craftsperson is able to invest in their own craft and into the creation of a bag, and the amount of time and budget one of these manufacturers will have. Obviously, Hermes is a multi-billion-dollar business, and while they make a lot of money off of these bags, they also have a comprehensive lifestyle line. Their bags are not the only things that keep the lights on. They sell a lot of other things, which means that they are not forced to strictly produce bags and push out as many bags as humanly possible. Whereas when it comes to one of these bag manufacturers, they live off selling bags, so they have to create a lot of them as quickly as possible. So they are much more constrained by time and also budget. They are not a multi-billion-dollar business, so they will not have access to the same training, to the same level of education and training as a craftsperson at Hermes, who had to spend years refining their craft before they were ever even allowed to dream of putting a bag together. Hermes does not have to cut corners. Now, that doesn't mean that they are not very intentional with how they run their business, because of course they are a business at the end of the day. They are not forced to cut corners, but when it comes to one of these bag manufacturers, because this is their bread and butter, there are going to be certain restrictions that they have to keep in mind when it comes to budget, when it comes to time, and when it comes to the machinery that they have available. But just to think that because one bag is produced in China and the other is produced in France, the one that's coming out of France is going to be inherently better, that is false, and it's something that we go in depth about in my video discussing these allegations that were made by Chinese manufacturers. If you'd like to hear more about that, I will make sure to have that video linked up here for you. But that's just one thing to put out there, that Hermes will not be quite as restricted by time and budget as some of these other manufacturers. So they're able to do things like using slow drying glue. They're able to put a lot more effort into these pieces. If something goes wrong, Hermes will throw away that piece even if it's almost finished, whereas one of these manufacturers probably does not have the same luxury, and as skilled and as talented as their craftspeople might be, they probably don't have access to the same level of training, or they don't have the capacity to train for quite as long as someone who works for one of these larger fashion houses. The fact that some of these super fakes have advanced so much that for the untrained eye, it's virtually impossible to tell the difference between a super fake and the real deal. In fact, I watched some of these videos where people will try to guess between a super fake and a real thing. They'll try to figure out which one is the authentic item, and in a lot of cases, even luxury enthusiasts will think that the super fake is better and higher quality than the real thing, which is quite surprising. But that is only one issue, how advanced and how close they come to an authentic piece. The other is how widely available they are, because while buying super fakes isn't illegal, selling them is. So in the past, you really had to take a risk by venturing out to street vendors on places like Canal Street. Now, all you have to do is go on social media. Personally, I can tell you that I get tens, if not hundreds of messages a week from these factories claiming to be selling bags that are identical to Hermes bags, offering me bags to review and send them to me. So I can only imagine how long it would take for someone to try to track down one of these places. You can find them on social media. I know that a lot of people will get them through WhatsApp, and it is a network of manufacturers and sellers. So when one gets taken down, there are plenty of other options out there that people can recommend to each other. So it's really quite shocking how large this network of fakes and super fakes is. In fact, this network has become so widely available that now luxury retailers, authorized luxury retailers, are having to combat return fraud, where shoppers will buy an inauthentic super fake from a Reddit group or from a manufacturer in China on WhatsApp, but they will also buy the authentic piece from a department store or a multi-brand store and return the fake item. And it has become a real issue for some of these retailers because it's not just Birkins, Kellys, and Chanel bags that are being duped, but also pieces from Celine and even the Row, believe it or not. So it is really becoming a global issue. So if you thought that, it's not something I'll ever have to deal with or keep in mind because I only ever buy pieces from authorized retailers, it might be something that you still want to be aware of, especially if you are a luxury novice, you don't have too much experience with luxury items. I would hate for you to end up with a super fake that you spent your hard-earned money on, not knowing what you're getting yourself into, because super fakes or buying fakes isn't necessarily bad. We can definitely discuss my thoughts on this topic, but if you're not aware of it and you're spending the price of the real thing on something without you knowing what you're getting yourself into, that I think would be really disheartening and heartbreaking, and I would not want that to happen to you. But it is something that we need to be aware of and we need to be cautious of, because this whole business of selling fakes is a lot bigger than I ever knew. I recently came across a report that was issued by the US Customs and Border Protection that reported that counterfeit goods comprise a staggering 2.5% of global trade, with luxury items being the most commonly counterfeited ones, and that just last year, so in 2024, they seized nearly 23 million counterfeit items nationwide that was worth over $2 billion in estimated retail value. So this operation is really a lot bigger than I feel like most of us would have thought. And at first, when I thought about buying fakes, I really had no issues with the idea. I mean, if you have no passion for luxury fashion, if you have no connection to the heritage of these brands, if you don't just love them for their artistry, why would you want to spend $15,000 on a bag when you could get essentially the same thing for a fraction of the price for, let's say, $2,000? It just makes no sense. No one in their right mind would want to spend an extra $10,000 just to wait and have to almost beg for a bag and then risk taking something that they never even wanted. It makes sense to just sort of go through this little loophole in the system and get something that is pretty much the same thing. And as we discussed, it can be extremely comparable, if not virtually identical. I personally would never go down that route just because I love these brands so much. It's something I'm extremely passionate about, and I love the heritage of a house like Hermes. But I can see why some people would turn to these shortcuts of getting their hands on one of these status symbol bags. But sadly, the idea of buying fakes goes way beyond legality. It also poses some ethical dilemma, because when it comes to buying a cheaply made knockoff, something that you would buy from a street vendor, again, they are extremely inexpensive compared to a super fake. and of course even more so compared to the real thing. But there is a reason these pieces are so inexpensive, and I can tell you that the manufacturers are not cutting corners when it comes to profit. They're cutting corners when it comes to how much it costs to manufacture these things. So a lot of these cheap knockoffs will be produced by forced or child labor under inhumane working conditions. They are made of extremely unethically sourced, unethically made, and harmful materials, and they are smuggled into the country. And you're essentially supporting ecosystems that are involved in smuggling and are most likely linked to more dangerous illegal activities, because the people who know how to smuggle fake designer bags are probably not just spending their time smuggling bags, but they also try to hide other things in there, which I don't even want to think of what those things are. But you're supporting this ecosystem of illegal activities, which might not necessarily be the case when it comes to super fakes, because as I mentioned, they are produced by highly skilled craftspeople. They are assembled with care and attention. They are made of ethically sourced materials or materials that are much higher quality. So your carbon footprint might not be quite as large, and you might be supporting actual craftspeople who do this for a living. I don't know if they do it out of love, but they don't do it because they are forced to do so. But at the end of the day, you are still buying a stolen item because the intellectual property is still being stolen from the brand. These manufacturers are not the ones who put the time and the effort into coming up with these concepts. And you might be thinking, why on earth would anyone want to buy a fake or a super fake? Well, I think it really comes down to your individual reason for buying a fake. I can imagine that there are a lot of people out there who at this point are pretty much priced out of luxury. Price of living has gone up. Luxury brands are notorious for increasing their prices. So there big majority of people out there at this point are priced out of buying luxury pieces. And if it's something that you place a lot of emphasis on, if you live in a society and you are surrounded by people who place a lot of value on physical possessions, I can see why you would feel like that you need to own one of these things to fit in. It is an evolutionary need for us to want to fit in, so there's nothing wrong with that. I can understand where you're coming from, but I just want you to know that that's not the only option you have. At this point, there are so many incredible contemporary brands. There are so many up and coming designer houses that create quality pieces, original designs that will add a lot more value to your collection than a super fake would. So that's something that you could certainly consider. But luxury items and these traditional luxury pieces, so Birkins, Kellys, Chanel bags, have become so incredibly visible, mainly because of social media, that it has become almost expected of us to have these things, because we are seeing so much of it, because we're exposed to it so often, at least online. We feel like that it is an essential part of life, and it's something that we need to make us feel happy and content. But if you really think about it, how often do you actually see these pieces in real life? I can tell you that I see them quite often because I go to places where there are a lot of luxury stores. But really just take the time to look around yourself. It also depends on where you live. If you live in the heart of a big city, you'll probably see these pieces more often than others. But just really think about it. How realistic are these pieces? How often do I see them in real life? And how much of it is just on social media? Because let's not forget that social media doesn't equal real life. People on social media will feature a facet of their life, and it's going to be the most glamorized, most beautifully curated facet, which I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with, but I just would not want you to be led to believe that without these things, you hold no value, and it's really not something that will make you a better person at the end of the day. But I can understand where this social pressure comes from. We live in a society that places a lot of emphasis and value on material possessions, and super fakes are basically a shortcut to convey that you're successful and hence you have high worth. But by taking this action, you might just be telling yourself that you are inferior, and if you cannot afford these things, then you are not as valuable as someone else, which I can tell you from personal experience that owning these things will not make you happier. Owning these things, as beautiful as some of them are, will not make you a better person. In fact, some studies found that people who wore counterfeits were more likely to feel less authentic, and it also increased their likelihood of both behaving dishonestly and judging others as unethical. So buying fakes will not only not make you a better person, it can actually have the opposite effect. Now, I'm not saying that if you buy super fakes or fakes, that will make you a bad person. It's possible that people who were already predisposed to behaving badly were just most likely to be open to the idea of wearing and buying fakes. It's not that the egg came before the chicken or the chicken came before the egg. Long story short, buying fakes or even buying the real thing will not make you a better person. I find it extremely disheartening that some people are driven to buying super fakes because they feel like that's what they need to do in order to fit in. Because I think at the end of the day, it really comes down to your internal motivation, why you are wanting to buy fakes. Is it because you genuinely appreciate the design, but you could never in a million years see yourself spending this much money on a bag? In which case, you go ahead and enjoy super fakes. But if you feel like you need to do this in order to fit in, let me tell you, these things will not make you feel better about yourself. These are not the things that will make you happy. I can tell this from first-hand experience. Owning the real things, these things only fill a void for so long, and then you'll start wanting even more and more of it. The most commonly counterfeited bags are still, of course, the most coveted status symbol bags. So the Hermes Birkin and Kelly, the Chanel Classic Flap, but some of the resellers also saw a huge uptick in the counterfeit Celine and Row bags, which is really shocking, but it really shouldn't be because it followed the 2023 quiet luxury boom, and the Real reported that they intercepted over 7,000 counterfeit bags during their authentication process just in 2024, which of course brings up the question, how can you authenticate and how can you spot a super fake when they are so close to the real deal? They are looking, feeling, and smelling better than ever before. And to the untrained eye, there might not be any difference, especially if they come from manufacturers that use the very same materials and the very same little features. So they might have the same zipper, they might have the same hardware, and they come really close. But as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, it will really come down to time, how much time can be invested in a single piece, which is of course it can make a drastic difference when it comes to a bag like an Hermes Birkin or a Kelly that is so highly priced, but the difference might not be quite as obvious or quite as drastic when it comes to a slightly less expensive creation. So how can you spot a fake? Of course, there are going to be certain details that you can pay attention to. So the overall structure might be a telltale sign. You might be able to look at the hardware and tell the difference. The logo might not be quite as refined. The embossing might be a little bit more blurry and not quite as clean. So there are some things that you can look at, but at the end of the day, you will not notice these slight, extremely tiny differences if you're not familiar with the real thing. So I would say that my biggest tip for you is to try to get acquainted with real items. And I'm not saying to spend all your money on the real thing if you cannot afford it, but thankfully there are so many consignment stores out there. There are so many reliable secondary places where you can touch, feel, and play with these things that I would want you to take advantage of. So if you're going to go to the secondary market to get your first luxury item, or even if you're going to go to a multi-brand store and you want to be sure that you are getting what you're paying for, I would highly suggest that you go into these consignment stores and spend some time becoming informed and educated on these pieces. Play with them, feel them, touch them, and try to have an idea for what you are buying for yourself. And when it comes to Hermes, there is an amazing trick that I would suggest that you take advantage of, which is having your pieces serviced by the brand. It's not only something that Hermes offers, but there are also other brands that will have a similar spa service. So Chanel will do the same thing. So if you buy something on the secondary market and you want to get the brand's seal of approval, you cannot just walk into the store and ask for their authentication. It's not something that they're willing to do in most cases. I think it comes down to legality. They don't want to be held responsible if they tell you the wrong information. So the only thing that you can do is that you can drop these pieces off with the brand and have them shipped to the spa. You can just have them cleaned if there are certain details that you want refreshed. If you're buying something that's a little bit older that perhaps needs a facelift, it is something that can be taken care of by the spa. When it comes to Hermes, you do not need to have an invoice or a proof of purchase. You just have to make sure that the piece is authentic, and if it's not, trust me, they will tell you. Well, they will not tell you that the piece isn't authentic, but they will not be willing to work on it. The only caveat to keep in mind is that if you live internationally and you have your piece sent to the Hermes spa in France, you're not going to be sending it yourself. It will be sent through your boutique. And if you live globally, you don't live in France, you might not get your piece back if it turns out to be inauthentic, because Hermes will not be responsible for smuggling illegal goods. They will not ship fake items back and forth. So that's just something to keep in mind. There are also some amazing services online that you can take advantage of when it comes to authentication. But if you want to get the brand seal of approval, drop it off at the brand and ask them to have it prepared for you, because at the end of the day, as trained as some of these authenticators are, the people who live and breathe these products are the ones who put them together for a living. So if anyone will recognize a real thing, it is going to be the person who knows how to craft it, who can take it apart and look at every single detail under a microscope. I would love to hear your stance on super fakes. If you knew you were getting something virtually identical, is it something that you would be tempted by? Have you ever been tempted? Do you own any super fakes? Is it something that you're very much against? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comment section on this topic. And do you think it's bad for these luxury brands? Does it dilute their brand value and their exclusivity? Because I really don't think it is the case when it comes to these ultra luxury brands like Hermes and Chanel, but perhaps it's not quite as clear cut when it comes to brands like the Row or even lesser known luxury brands. I am really curious to hear what you have to say about this. Again, at first I really did not have any issues with people buying fakes, but sadly this ethical dilemma has changed my mind. But I wanted to make this video just to inform you on how prominent this issue is becoming, and you might be affected by it yourself, even if you would never buy anything on the secondary market. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but I know that some people are just not comfortable with doing that. But you have to be careful with super fakes, because they might just end up at some of the most reliable authorized retailers too, or even in the brand's own boutique if we're not careful with them. But I really appreciate you being here and watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't done so yet, so you will not miss my next video. And I really hope to see you back here soon.